Okay, we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Spring 2024 Virtual Tasting. I'm Michael Torino. I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Sales here at Ridge Vineyards, and I'll be your moderator for today's tasting. The wines in tasting order today will be 2022 Estate Chardonnay, 2022 Three Valleys, 2022 Paso Robles, 2022 Geyserville, and we'll finish it out with the 2021 Estate Cabernet. A few housekeeping items before we introduce the panelists and get started. We, of course, use Zoom as our platform, so please, we love this to be an interactive tasting. Introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. It's also a great place to give general feedback, share your comments, thoughts on the wines. If you have questions, we ask you to do that via the Q&A function. The chat tends to go really fast, and we can't always keep up, and we don't want to miss your questions. Any questions that we can, we'll answer live today. And if we don't get to your question for some reason, we'll make sure we send you a follow-up email response to it. We also, do love this to be interactive, and we love to see you and not just have you guys see us. So please share your pictures on social media, tag us at Ridge Vineyards. Michaela is going to be monitoring our social media today, and we'd love to see and hear from you. You can also post on LinkedIn and tag us. Again, we'd love to see it. I want to thank the regional team who's out in full force again today. From east to west, Tom's in Connecticut with the Eater Brothers team and a group of Psalms. Poppy Monroe is in Nebraska with the SGWS team. And Christina Donnelly kind of drew the good card today. She's in Pebble Beach with Ryan Johnson, our Director of Marketing. They're hosting some of the Hunter Wine Marketing team and a group of Psalms. So welcome, regional team. Thanks for organizing all of our wholesalers and getting everybody here with us. We'll go ahead and welcome in the panelists now. We have Trester Goetting, Montebello winemaker, joining us. Tress, this is, I guess, your second virtual tasting with us for wholesale. So thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Of course, I also want to call out a quick note on Tress. Our spring newsletter, which is just hitting everybody's mailboxes right now. There's a great article with Tress and Shauna that's kind of insight and background, kind of outside of the wine world and some of their inspiration and what they like to do. It's a great read. I know Murphy will drop it in the chat, and it'll be in the hard copy of the newsletter as well. But Tress, I love reading, your love for music and how your mom got you into the wine business and really was your inspiration. It's a great read and kind of behind the scenes stuff for you guys.
Yeah, that was a fun article, and it was, when it came out, I hadn't seen Shauna's responses, and it's funny how similar ours are, with her dad being responsible, of course, for her wine experience, and my mom, and then she's an artist as well with sculpture, and me with the music. It's very interesting. Yeah, it was cool.
It really was. Even, the way you both relax after harvest is similar. It was a great read. So I definitely encourage everybody to check it out. Next up would be Dave Gates, who's our Senior Vice President of Vineyard Operations. Dave, we'll talk a bit about the growing season and how it's going this year, but there was snow on Montebello yesterday. So I imagine you're stressing a little bit.
Yeah, a little. It's farming, right? I'd much rather, like I was saying earlier, I'd rather have the snow in January, February. But second year in a row we've had some in April, so I guess it didn't happen on the first.
Yeah, just wild, huh?
Yeah.
And then lastly is John Olney, our head winemaker and COO here at Ridge. John, thanks for joining us as always.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to be with you.
And John, before we launch into tasting, I wanted to talk a little bit about our sustainability efforts at Ridge and some updates. We kind of have a big one today, and that's lightweight glass, and really how we're making that move and how you've spearheaded it. I was hoping you could kind of speak to it. It's a great tasting too, because the bottles right now, 21 Estate Cabernet is in the old heavier glass, where the other reds are in the lighter glass. So it's kind of an interesting way to see it side by side.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so about 2 years ago, we started, sort of doing an inventory of our glass, and specifically its weight, to really evaluate, whether or not we could go to a lighter weight glass. Obviously, glass is one of the sort of largest parts of the carbon footprint in the wine business. So, any reduction in the materials that leads to a lighter glass, it adds up in a beneficial way all the way down the line, from the manufacturing to the weight, and therefore the amount of fuel it costs to move it around, both as an empty bottle and then later on when it's filled. Our original glass, the glass that we've been using for years and years at Ridge, wasn't really one of the heavier ones to start with. It was about 575 grams. But we were able to bring that down by a full 20% to about 460 grams. And as Mike has mentioned here, all the Paso, the Geyserville, these are all in that lighter weight glass. And so far, it's been it's been great. I mean, you really can't even see the difference, but certainly on the sustainability side, it's a pretty big impact. So we're really happy with it.
It sure is, and that is again in our news articles, our spring newsletter this year as well. And Murphy dropped the link in the chat, but it's when you look at because you're right, feeling the bottle side by side, you really can't see or tell. But when you look at the totality of it, we did some analyses of the savings we'll have, and it's amazing how much that adds up.
Yeah, it really is, and if you think about it, there's certain situations, champagne being the obvious one, where you're forced to use a heavier glass, or else you get some unwelcome surprises. But with a still wine, it really it doesn't really serve any purpose. So I'm glad that we've been able to move over to the lighter weight glass.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thanks for the update on that, John. I know that was a big project for you, so appreciate that. So we'll go ahead and move into the wines now. And the first wine we'll taste is our 2022 Estate Chardonnay. And Tress, I was hoping you can kind of start us on that wine and take us through a little bit.
Yeah, I would love to. Let me get a little bit of it in my glass here. I like baseball, so I have funny superstitions. It's bad luck to talk about a wine without some of it in your glass. So here we go. All right. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about the location of where we are in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It is a standalone appellation. So these mountains here kind of separate the north coast from the central coast. But it is not either of those. It is its own entity. And when you come up here and you see this mountain in its proximity to the Pacific, which is not far at all, as the crow flies, probably at 11 miles or so. So coastal influence. You can see there on the map, we have Chardonnay planted up and down the mountain, the majority of it at our bottom vineyard, the Klein vineyard, and a little bit at the Rooston vineyard. And then there is a very small amount at the very top at the winery where I am now, at the Peroni vineyard, our Lone Tree block. So total acreage, I'd have to defer to David on that. I'm not sure. David, how many acres roughly do we have up here?
Of everything?
Chardonnay.
Oh, Chardonnay?
Yeah, all Chardonnay.
Yeah, just about 20.
20
just
acres.
under 20. Yep.
Okay, yeah. And then we have some new blocks coming in as well in our open space phase planting. So more to come, which is great. It's really the perfect place to grow Chardonnay with that proximity to the ocean, the elevation, the limestone soils. You get this beautiful minerality in our Chardonnay, which has become a key marker for the style of this wine. And 2022, thinking about limited yields that year because it was it was another drought year for us, and it was quite hot that year, and so limited quantities. So this wine, on a wholesale standpoint, is pretty limited, and we're hoping to see that swing the other way. We got a nice harvest in 23, so looking like we're swinging back the other way finally. So But anyhow, the 22 harvest, it was pretty dry, pretty warm, like I said, and it was pretty condensed. It was an early harvest because we got a heat spell in late August. So we actually started picking this wine on August 29th, the blocks for this, and we finished on September 12th. So pretty compact harvest as well. Now, as far as winemaking, the vinification of this wine is whole cluster. So we'll pick this by hand, of course, up on the mountain. You've got pretty steep terrain and rugged terrain, and every nook and cranny has got a vine planted to it. So it's a bit of a puzzle, but we get it all in as whole clusters, and we'll dump that right into the press as whole clusters, and then we'll lightly squeeze. We have a bladder press. Squeeze that juice until we're happy with the sugar, the acid, the color, all of that. And then I'll taste at the pan to determine when to stop that press, because if you squeeze too hard, you start to get a bitter kind of phenolic character in the wine. So it's really important to taste at the press pan. And it's actually one of my favorite parts about harvest, because that juice is so delicious. It's just instantly gratifying. So then what we'll do is, so we'll press that juice to a tank, and we'll let it settle overnight. But then the next morning we'll come in and actually mix that tank and kick up that lees, because we want that in the ferment. So we'll stir up the lees, and then we'll go to barrel with the solids in the barrels, and then we'll just let it ride. We'll let it start its own natural fermentation. And that's the scariest part of the vintage for me, waiting for that to kick off. But you don't want it to sit for too long without any activity. And so I'm watching it like a hawk. It usually takes about 5 days, but I'm biting my nails. But it does start. And then once it starts, it creates that CO2, which will protect the wine. It protects it from any microbial activity, protects the color. It kind of stabilizes the wine, and it starts to smell really, really nice. So we'll get it through the primary fermentation, and that can take a couple of months. And sometimes our cellar is nice and cool. It's probably about 55 degrees. So it's a slow, long fermentation, which is what we want. That's how we keep this beautiful fruit intact in this wine. It doesn't blow off or cook off like the warm ferment would. So we encourage that. It just takes patience. And then once the primary fermentation is finished, the malolactic will start, and that's natural as well. And it just starts to go, and we start monitoring the numbers. And once we get to this point, we start stirring the barrels. That's called batonnage, where we take a swivel type sweeping tool and scrape the bottom of the barrel to kick up all that sediment into the wine. And that is how we get that beautiful mouthfeel into this wine. And then once it finishes malolactic, which can be as late as, well, this year, it didn't finish until mid-March. So it's a while. So patience again. Once it is finished, then we'll start racking clean off of that sediment and start blending all the components. And this can be, that map up and down the mountain, this can be upwards of 16 to 20 individual blocks that are their own wines. So we'll start putting those together as either the estate, or if we have enough fruit to go beyond the estate, and we have things that are a different character, we'll also do a Montebello Chardonnay. But for 22 limited yields, we just did the estate here. Very happy with the outcome of this wine. I get, on the nose, I get this beautiful Asian pear and kind of a lemon meringue brioche. There's some apricot, ginger notes, flint notes, which is that minerality that we get here on the mountain from the limestone soils. You definitely get that. It enters really soft, very pleasant, medium bodied. It's a nice balance of fruit, acid, and the oak is integrated. So it's got nice layers. and then the finish is just long and clean. So I think this will be a crowd pleaser. We shall see. I hope you guys are enjoying it.
Yeah, it's really fantastic, Tress. That freshness and like you said on the finish, just that minerality and that cleanness. Yeah, I think people are going to be really happy with this. They're not going to be happy with their allocation, but they're going to be happy with the wine. So it's a problem we've gotten used to. Excellent. Thanks so much, Tress. We'll move on to the first of our reds. And John, we have the 2022 Three Valleys here. If you can take us through that wine.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so the the Three Valleys, Ridge has we're well steeped in single vineyard winemaking, going all the way back to the 60s. Ridge was one of the first wineries to really champion single vineyards, and just sort of going around California and scouting out and trying to find those sort of perfect spots where grape varietal, soil, and microclimate are perfectly matched. And that's how, over the years, we'll be trying the Paso Robles here shortly. That's a single vineyard Zinfandel from the Doozy Vineyard. Geyserville, of course. Lytton Springs is another one. And in order to make each of those wines, it's very similar to what Tress was mentioning about the Chardonnay, in terms of there's a selection process. And by that, I mean that if let's take the Geyserville vineyard, even that single vineyard is divided up into numerous smaller parcels, each of which we're going to pick as they get ripe. So at the end of harvest, we could have as many as 25 different fermentations that are all coming from the Geyserville vineyard. And after malolactic fermentation, usually sometime around December, right after harvest, we'll start to taste and evaluate each one of those parcels. And in any given year, there's always going to be your A lots, the ones that really represent the vineyard, that have the most intensity and richness. So those we're going to blend, and there you have your Geyserville. Do the same process for the Lytton Springs, and so on. So then the other lots, the ones that were good, but maybe didn't make the cut in terms of going into our single vineyard, the B lots, if you will, those will then combine, and that's how we make the Three Valleys. So the Three Valleys is a blend of all the miscellaneous parcels from all of our different single vineyard wines throughout Sonoma. And so in that sense, it differs in that it's more, there's a little bit more of the winemaking involved. We're trying to blend a wine, and we're also sort of seeking a style that's a little bit more approachable. It's something that we like to offer by the glass, in a certain sense, kind of an introductory wine for Ridge. We hope it's good enough that if you like that, you'll move on to single vineyards and try some of our other wines. So that's a little bit of the philosophy behind the Three Valleys. And I think the 22 is really, I think we really hit it pretty well with the 22. There's a lot of, you kind of see this in a lot of the 22s. There's this really, really great expression of fruit in there. A little bit more sort of the red raspberry kind of fruit. And of course it is a wine, even though the varietal percentages will change year to year, it's predominantly or majority Zinfandel based. So that kind of drives a lot of that, the style and the fruit expression in the wine.
Yeah, and it's always so interesting, just the approach that you, Shauna, and Tress take on making Three Valleys. I mean, it's made just as any one of our other single vineyard wines. There's no shortcut in the winemaking process. There's no skimping in any way. It's really the same process all the way through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, these are these are all grapes that we either grow, or they're part of our other programs. Grapes that we buy from growers. We're not buying wine in bulk. We're aging it all, you know, in American oak, just like we do with all of our single vineyard wines. You know, same packaging materials, same treatment.
Yeah, which is interesting. You know, not every winery takes that approach with their, you know, kind of entry level wine. But I know I say it, I feel like every year, this wine, just vintage after vintage, keeps getting better. And the 21 vintage, of course, had a great score on Wine Spectator and was named, you know, their value pick of the week when they scored it a couple months back. And, you know, it keeps getting better each vintage.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Excellent. We did have a question come in regarding bud break at Montebello. Dave, if you don't mind fielding that, when the usual bud break is, and I know we're in kind of weather patterns where there's nothing usual anymore, but
You stole my thunder. What's usual anymore, Mike? Typically it's March, and anywhere from the beginning of March to the end of March for a Chardonnay. That always comes out first at Montebello, and then Cabernet Merlot will start in right after that. Usually, you know, mid-March to end of March and into April. So this year, Chardonnay was toward the end of March, and we're just seeing Merlot is starting to wake up right now, and Cabernet is still, it's the vines are waking up, but they haven't really started to push yet. So I expect this last two systems of rain were quite cold. So that's put the brakes on the bud break for Cabernet. So I expect it in next week it's going to warm up. So the week after that we'll be in full bud break mode. And having a cold spell right before bud break is actually good, because when the vines come out, they come out all at once instead of kind of straggling along. So that helps.
absolutely. And we had a kind of follow-up question on that same note there, just about the trellis system and how we vary it by varietal.
Oh, it's that's easy at the only thing that we head train and spur prune, so little goblet, little trees. That's Zinfandel, Carignan, Petite Sirah, whether it's at Montebello or in Sonoma, which is where most of those varieties are grown. At Montebello, we cane prune everything, and we have kind of a loose vertical shoot position to trellis. So some catch wires, and everything goes up in little columns. It's not as pretty as it's not as low to the ground as you'd see in Burgundy or Bordeaux. It's not as pretty as you see in Napa, because I like a little more bushy vine to help with sun cover over the fruit. But that's what we do.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Dave. And I'll kind of keep you on the hot spot as we move into our next wine. We'll move into the 2022 Paso Robles, and you know, kind of a key notable wine missing from our spring lineup this year is East Bench, and I'm hoping we can kind of talk about that as we move into Paso too, and what's going on with East Bench, and you know, the 1-year hiatus as it will be.
Yeah, let's get that out of the way first. So what's really fun though, when we have it available, is to taste the East Bench and Paso Robles side by side, because they're, you know, mostly usually 100% Zin, and two similar regions in terms of their heat accumulations, but very different in terms of the way Zinfandel expresses itself. And it's a great example of, you know, why we make all these millions of different SKUs, right? Why we have all these wines, because they are so different. So East Bench was planted in 2000. The vines were planted in 2000, 2001, and they had been quite productive. The ground that they were in had been fallow and had horses and animals on it, for cows and horses on it, for, you know, 60, 70 years. And when we replanted, there's this nasty little bug that we caught from Europe called the vine mealybug that has infested most of the vineyards in California now. We held it at bay for a while. It started in the Coachella Valley and worked its way up. But while it hit on East Bench vines about 8 or 9 years ago, and it's quite debilitating to the vines. And between this vine mealybug that we are managing now organically quite well, and then the drought, especially the 2021 and 22 drought, the vines yields just crashed. And so we didn't really have enough to put out in the wholesale market the 2022 East Bench. The good news is the vines have bounced back in a big way, so there's going to be quite a bit of 2023 East Bench next year, not this year, next year.
Which is great, and it gives our trade partners an idea of what's going on with that wine and that it's coming back, and it brings us into the 2022 Paso, which is kind of the natural sort of substitute for East Bench for placements over the next year while we wait for East Bench to come back. And Dave, I was hoping you can kind of start us with this wine too.
You bet.
And
so Paso. So this is I like to call this one of our pre-Paul Draper vineyards. Dave Bennion, our first winemaker, founding winemaker at Ridge, made a wine from the Benito Ducey's vineyard just south of the town of Paso Robles in 1967. And then after Paul joined Ridge, starting in 1976 and into the future now, we've been making a wine from this vineyard every single year. So it's one of the first wines that actually put Paso Robles on the label, which is kind of cool. It's a typical Zinfandel from that area, so it's very exuberant fruit on the nose, and just really luscious as far as the texture and the wine as you drink it. And Zinfandel doesn't have a lot of tannin anyway, and the tannins on the Paso are always just velvety, even from the get-go. So it's a very easy drinking wine. So Benny Ducey had been farming this vineyard ever since his two oldest brothers went away to World War II when he was, I think, 14, something like that, 13 or 14. So he and then when he inherited this ranch, and his brother Dante inherited the ranch on the other side of the freeway, which wasn't a freeway back then, and had farmed it ever since, and until he passed. He left the land, the vineyard, to his nephew Mike Ducey, whose family also farms quite a few other vineyards, including the Dante Ducey vineyard, Fossil Creek, where you get a little bit from, Paper Street, which is a really nice vineyard up in the hills and the west side of the appellation that is getting great reviews. But the best vineyard is Benny's vineyard, and that's the one we get. So these vines were planted in the early 1920s, so in the middle of Prohibition. The Ducey family bought it in, I think, 1924. The story goes that they had a couple boarding houses, and they bought this place on the proceeds of that. And then, if you, part of the thing with the boarding houses, you get room and board. Well, the board included a little bit of under the table wine, I guess, from these vineyards. But yeah, it's mostly Zin. There's a scattering of like one or two vines of Grenache or Carignan, but it's pretty much 100% Zin. The oldest vines, there's about 5 acres of the 20-acre vineyard are still in the own-rooted old vines. The rest have been gradually, for the last 60 years, been replanted as Flaxer has slowly moved in to take out the old vines. But it's always a crowd pleaser. I love this wine. The acidity is great on it for being such a warm region. And yeah, it really does showcase Paso.
Yeah, it's and Tress, this must be a real fun wine to make too. I mean, it is just like exploding with fruit out of the glass. Just the pure expression is in, loads of cherries, and super approachable. I mean, when we're done with this, I want to drink the rest of this. It's right there.
It is. I know. I'm smelling it now, and it does. It's just very, like David said, exuberant is a great word. It's really just packed with fruit. It has that riper style, so you would expect that, but it's also so soft, and it has nice weight to it, good pH. So it's a really fun one to have in our lineup, because we have other Zins that are more on the bright, as we'll see with the Geyserville, a little more red profile, bright, fresh acidity. This one is kind of quite the opposite, and it's nice to have that variation in the lineup, and it is super fun to make. It is, and the most enjoyable part of it is going to go check out the vineyard to assess ripeness, and when you walk this vineyard, it's a real treat because it's such a healthy vineyard. That's probably one of the healthiest old vine Zinfandel plantings I've ever seen. It's just a very green, lush. It's just and you know, these vines are quite large, and you know, you're looking at fruit hanging at eye level as you walk through. It's like walking through a little vineyard forest. So it's just fun. Yeah, it's a great example of Paso, like David said too.
Absolutely. And we had a question come in, Tress, and you know, the vineyard's the same. So I think on a winemaking perspective, you can kind of explain this a little bit. We make, of course, the Paso Robles Zin, but we also make a Benito Doozy Zin that's part of the club in our DTC program. And we have a question: what's the difference in those two wines?
So essentially, the difference is in ripeness. It's the Ducey designation comes from a part of the vineyard that we call the canyon, and that sounds extreme. It's not really a canyon, but it is a part of the vineyard that swales down and drops into a little miniature canyon type swale. And when we pick the Paso fruit, that is not quite ripe yet. It's because of that canyon. And so then we're focusing on getting the fruit that's ready. And then usually what happens is then when we go back to get that fruit that was left, it's then ultra ripe. So it kind of has become, because of that, just the way that we do it. Because with that extra ripeness, you get a really a different wine. It's just taking this style, the Paso that we're trying now, and just kind of exaggerating the fruit and the ripeness and the density of it. So it is if you taste them side by side, you would think they were from two different vineyards. It's pretty amazing. So that's kind of how that was born and came about and what we do.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Tress. Yeah, that was a great question for sure. Perfect. We'll move on to the next wine, and it's 2022 Geyserville. And John, I was hoping I could call on you to take us through this wine.
Yeah, for sure. So the 22 Geyserville, Geyserville, a lot like Paso Robles, is one of the oldest running zins that Ridge has made. Our first Geyserville was in 1966, and it really, if you go back and you think about the history of Ridge and all of the different Zinfandels that they've made from all over California, I think that it's possible Ridge may have made maybe at least in 1 year Zinfandel from just about every old vines vineyard throughout California at some point. We used to make things from the Amador and all over California. And there's just certain vineyards, Geyserville being one of them, where year in and year out, there's just something really special about the fruit that comes out of there, and therefore it gives this unique wine. And the 22 is no exception. Like we mentioned before, really in the 22s, there's this great expression of fruit. But what you get with Geyserville that I think, takes it maybe to another level is kind of behind that fruit, there's still this structure and this beautiful acidity that, I think gives it an extra layer, a little more complexity, and also makes it kind of tightly knit and something that it's really one of the few Zinfandels out there, or Zinfandel-based wines, that can really age beautifully in the cellar. I mean, we pull out 10, 15, sometimes 20-year-old Geyservilles. Same thing with Lytton Springs, and they really reward aging. So, I think a lot of pure Zinfandels, which have that immediate sort of burst of fruit, a lot of times they're often, best drunk in the first 3 to 4 years, and then they don't really turn into something more than that, but not the case with the Geyserville. It's a really one of the unique things about the Geyserville vineyard is it is, of course, a classic field blend. So you have, rather than different grape varietals planted in separate parcels, you have the grape varietals being interplanted. So you'll have Zinfandel, but you'll also have Petite Sirah, and you'll have Carignan, as well as a number of other varieties being planted alongside each other. What's neat at Geyserville is that in most old vines vineyards throughout California, you have first and foremost Zinfandel, but then the second most planted sort of complementary varietal is Petite Sirah. And then after that, you'll have Carignan. It's flip-flopped at Geyserville. So there's 20% actually Carignan. It's in the Geyserville, which is a fairly large amount for a field blend wine. And what that contributes is this beautiful acidity to it. It gives the wine this brightness. And it's one of the things that, we often taste the Lytton Springs and Geyserville side by side blind, to see if we can pick them out. And when you can pick them out, that's one of the identifying sort of factors is you'll have with the Lytton Springs, it tends to be darker fruit, maybe a little more tannic structure to it. And Geyserville, a little bit more jammy fruit up front, but then that beautiful bright acidity that's sort of woven through the whole wine. But yeah, I mean, I think I really think the 22 is a home run, and I'm really liking it, even at this early stage.
Couldn't agree more. And it's really that acidity and that just structure to it. I mean, there's so much going on in this wine. And then you still have that great fruit right up front. And you kind of mentioned the interplantings, and a big part of that is co-fermentation, right? And that helps kind of give that structure.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, we're big believers in the benefits of co-fermenting. I mean, we could go through and David would hate us if we tried to do it, but we could go through and try to pick out each variety separately, and we have actually done that before, where we pick just Zinfandel, ferment it, and pick just Carignan, and then blend them afterwards. But we always get a much better result by co-fermentation. There's just something about the synergy, and I think also bringing all of those different components together initially really works a lot better, because you've got that beautiful fruit from the Zinfandel, you've got the acidity coming from the Carignan, and then of course you have the color and the tannin coming from the Petite Sirah, and getting those all sort of mixed together from the onset is the best way to go.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And it just the structure to the wine, I mean, it really kind of comes through. You can feel it and taste it.
Yeah, it's beautiful vineyard.
Yeah, great. And looks like the 22 is a great vintage. I mean, that's drinking absolutely deliciously. So excellent. Great. We'll move on to our next wine, and Tress, if we can come back to you on this one. It's our 21 Estate Cab.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about this wine. So the blend on this wine, as you can see on the label there, 84% Cabernet Sauvignon and 16% Merlot. I wanted to really focus on this as we try the wine today. It's really kind of unique to have this percentage of Merlot and no Cabernet Franc or Petit Verdot. And to me, it's really what is making this wine so streamlined and focused. I love Merlot, especially up here on this mountain. It's just absolutely beautiful. And so anytime I see a good percentage of it in our blends, I instantly drawn to it. And this is a great example. So we've got that. And then the other thing to point out is the 13.3% alcohol. I think that just proves that you don't have to get the fruit up on this mountain and overripe to achieve balance and beautiful fruit profile. And that is one of the unique things about the soils here, and the location, and of course the elevation. So we're really tasting the mountain is what I'm saying. And that's the ultimate goal for us. If we could just have this wine taste like the vineyards, then we've done a good job. And I think that's what we're seeing here. The first vintage of this wine was in 1978, and that was the Santa Cruz Mountains label at that time. And then in 2008, it became the Ridge Estate. So you may see some of those older bottles floating around and wonder what's the difference. And it just had to do with how the older vines came on and then were replaced with younger vines, and the evolution of the vineyards. And then, of course, increased production and recognition. So now we have the Estate Cabernet Sauvignon. So the difference between this wine and the Montebello, that's probably the number one question that we always get. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. I mean, it's really comes down to parcel block designation and the quality of the wine that's made from that block, and really in a true sense, because what we do is we taste all of these blocks, and I mean, we're talking about dozens and dozens and dozens of individual wines, and we taste them all blind, a panel of us, of course, all of us here, plus Paul Draper, our CEO, Mark Vernon, will be there, and some of our other cellar folks, and we taste these things blind and we rate them. And if they're all rated at a high level, well, then that goes into the Montebello. And it's really not saying that. It's kind of like John was talking about with the Geyserville and the Three Valleys. It's not like we're treating these any differently. They're vinified the exact same way. We always assume every block's going to go into Montebello, and that's how we vinify it. And then if it shows later that it didn't make the cut, then we end up with this amazing wine. So you can't really lose, right? It's a good way to do it.
No, yeah, exactly. You're winning both ways. And that's kind of where the wines sort of split, though. Once you do that assemblage process, then you start treating them a little different in terms of oak and aging time and how you move forward, right?
That's exactly right. So that's why I'm always excited to determine the blend, because there's a lot of barrel shuffling that needs to happen. And so essentially what the Estate Cabernet differs from at that point, when we make the blend and go back to barrels, this wine goes back to 50% brand new oak and 50% 1-year-old oak. So we're taking, whereas with the Montebello, it's 100% new oak. So, and it works out pretty well, because when we make the Montebello blend from the previous year, then I have those 1-year-old barrels available. So it's just kind of, it works out pretty well. It's a little more difficult and chaotic than that, but it does work out. So yeah, that's really what it comes down to. And so that's why when you taste this wine next to a Montebello, you still get the same characteristics. You get, that cedar, that juniper, that herbal, that minerality that is so, it's so Montebello. It's so this mountain, and you get that in both the wines. So, as far as I'm concerned, this is a heck of a deal for what you get, because it's essentially, a lot of people call it the baby Montebello or the brother Montebello. So it's very true.
Yeah, and our best fans know that really well, and they scoop this up immediately.
Yeah. So, like I was saying, as far as characteristics of the wine, you also get this, there's always this gravelly, dusty minerality. It's got this one in particular. I love the tannin profile on it because of this blend percentage. That's, you get the tannin and the structure from the cab. And then you get this nice, soft, balancing plushness from the Merlot. And it just, the tannins really become youthful. And that tells me, when I taste this is going to age very well. This is going to really lay down and evolve, and it's going to be really fun to watch. So cheers, you guys. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And we had a question come in, Tress, on the Bordeaux varietals at Montebello, and basically around the estate cab. If it's just Merlot and cab in the particular vintage, what's happening with the Petit Verdot and Cab Franc? Is that going into Montebello then, or really depends on the vintage?
Yeah, great question. That's exactly right. So the good news is that those varietals for that year, 21, were exceptional and made it into the Montebello blend. So you'll see that on the label. So that's a good thing. Like I said, you can't lose, because if something is great, then great, and if not, great too. So, but that's exactly right. We kind of just, certain vintages we have more of the Franc, and it may just happen to be of the quality that we're looking for to round out that blend. And by the way, when we do these blends, we always start with the Montebello and blend backwards, blend down, if you will. So we create the Montebello, and then whatever is left becomes this wine. And that year we gobbled up all of those varietals for the Montebello.
And it's like you said, I mean, you end up with two exceptional wines, just very different. One, in that more approachable style, and one that's really, although this I think is going to lay down for quite some time as well. But
yeah,
excellent. Well, it's yeah, really showing well, Tress.
Yeah, I think so. I'm enjoying it.
Great. Well, we've come to the end of the wines here, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank Tress, Dave, and John for taking the time today to taste through with our trade partners. I want to thank everybody for joining. I think we probably had a record attendance looking at the count of participants that came in today. So thank you. I know it's busy out there. Thanks for taking the time to taste through with us. Hope you enjoyed the wines. And we hope to see you in the fall. Our fall virtual tasting will be September 20th. So we'll probably be knee deep in harvest. And I hope you guys will still join me. If not, it'll be just me, but I think we'll make it work. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.